Okay, in this particular video, we're going to be going over Ephesians 6 and 12, as I have it in my notes, where Paul was writing a letter trying to explain that we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but we wrestle with these particular rulers of the darkness of this world. Keep watching. Okay, all right, welcome back to another video. So if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. What I go over in my content is esoteric and exoteric research in retrospect to how it influences you, and how by being on a more pious lifestyle, how that can help you in your soul journey on obtaining the mysteries of the light in a better way. So as I was saying earlier in the introduction, of course, what we're going to be going over is Ephesians 6 and 12. Now let me pull that out. So the reference that I'll be using is an NKJV in terms of going over this particular Bible Unlock session here. So this is what it reads in Ephesians 6 and 12. So it says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." In the heavenly places. So in some earlier videos, of course, I went over Psalms 83 and Psalms 82, how there is these particular beings that said we wanted to take for ourselves the places of God in possession. So according to this letter that Paul was writing to his brethren, he was trying to let them know, based on the level that he had ascended to, that he was trying to explain what they're actually dealing with. So in this letter it says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood," okay, "but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." That's what it reads here in Ephesians 6 and 12 in this particular letter. So there's going to be a couple of sources that I'm going to use to help unlock what he was trying to say to his brethren, and how he was trying to prepare them for what they might expect moving forward. Okay, so as I have it in my notes here, I want to reference to the Counterfeit Spirit. So in Janas, Honas, I believe that's how you pronounce the name there, in the Gnostic religion, she was basically kind of going over what this particular counterfeit spirit means based upon doing some cross-analyzation. So let's read what it says here. This is page 92. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. So it says, in this section here, it says the first archon, and then in parentheses it says Eodaboth, brought Adam, created by the archons, and placed him in paradise, which he said to be a delight for him. That is, he intended to deceive him, for there, the archons, delight is bitter, and their beauty is lawless. It says their delight is deceit, and their tree was hostility. It says their fruit is poison, against which there is no cure, and their promise is death to him, meaning to Adam. It says, yet their tree was planted as tree of life. I shall disclose to you the mystery of their life. It is their counterfeit spirit, which originated from them, so as to turn him, meaning Adam, away, so that he might not know his perfection. In previous videos, there was one that was done where it was talking about 5 in a house, and how there'll be 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. One of those 3 was actually the counterfeit spirit, and I'll link that in the description area underneath the like button, of course, so you can seek out this resource for yourself. So here, if we go into this a little bit, remember it said the promise is death. In some other Gnostic texts, it goes over how it says that how it talks about how marriage follows the woman. Okay, and then it talks about how reproduction follows marriage, and death follows reproduction. Okay, so here Precepting with that, it says the promise, it says the fruit is poison against which there is no cure, and their promise is death to him. Okay, the promise is death to him. So it sounds like this beauty is lawless is possibly dealing with procreation. Okay, it's possibly dealing with procreation. Let's go a little bit more in this book here where it talks about counterfeit spirit. Now this here is on page 200, dealing with the archons and angels. And this is what it says here. It says, but the real counterpart of the Old Testament God is their master and begetter, Yodabal. We have related before how he secured his mastery over these creatures of his by withholding from them the power he had drawn from his mother. Okay, there was a power that he drawn from his mother that he was trying to withhold. It says the dark picture is somewhat brightened by his joining to each of the seven a better power, some of them apparently copies of corresponding aeons as providence, understanding, wisdom. Whether these are in earnest what their names purport or a mockery of the real thing, the text does not here allow us to decide, but in view of the latter role of the counterfeit spirit as the most characteristic life expression of the archons, the second alternative is more probable. Okay, now let's go to the next part where it deals with this counterfeit spirit here. It says the archons, they counter a specific action here. So it says that the mother sent her spirit down to the generations of man to awaken the kindred essence in them from the impotence of knowledge. Now, when you look up the word impotence, it basically talks about the erecting of something. So it appears that when the mother sent her spirit in, it was to guide man into understanding how to lift up something, possibly from within, because here, precepting it with the earlier stuff that we're going to go into, how it talks about this procreation being the death that is the promise to Adam. So here it says the mother sent her spirit down to the generations of man to awaken the kindred essence in them from the impotence of knowledge and the evil of the tomb being the body, because it's actually imprisoning something, a specific divine essence is being imprisoned in the tomb through procreation. Okay, it says this continuing activity of the material spirit is to prepare them for the coming of the spirit from the holy aeons themselves, who will bring the perfection. Okay, then it goes on to say the archons counter this action, meaning they counter the action of the mother sending in her spirit. It says with their, this is the archons countering with their equally continuous one, which is their counterfeit spirit, which enters the souls, overgrows and hardens, closes them, weighs them down, leads them astray to works of evil, and thus makes them impotent to know. Through it also all carnal what? Procreation is carried on. All carnal procreation is carried on through this particular counterfeit spirit, which enters into the soul and weighs it down and makes you impotent to know, because what you are doing is you are basically externally your essence, or that which is supposed to be being sent up, is actually coming out, and through that particular process all carnal procreation is carried on, which causes the tomb situation and has you imprisoned in the body. Okay, has you imprisoned in the body. So let's go on here in my notes and see if we can reference some other stuff here, because this is starting to get pretty good. So what we're dealing with is Ephesians 6 and 12, where we're talking about how you wrestle not with flesh and blood. So to show that this is actually written in other texts talking about how something weighs down the soul, what we want to do now, of course, is reference to page 271 in the Hermetica. Now this, I'll leave all resources underneath the like button so you can look into this information on your own. But this is what it says on page 271. So it says, it talks about these daemons that make their way in through the body. It says, and they enter into the what? Two irrational parts of the soul. Remember, we were just talking about how something enters into the soul. Now we know, based on this text, that it's the two irrational parts of the soul. And each daemon perverts the soul in a different way, according to his special mode of action. Okay? But the rational part of the soul remains free from the dominion of the daemons and fit to receive God into itself. So that's the portion that in most are at rest. Some people talks about how your God is asleep within you, that you need to basically wake up. Okay, so skipping down here, it talks about how the daemons then govern all your earthly life, using your bodies as their instruments, and this government Hermes calls destiny. Okay, that's what it's called, destiny. Now remember, I was referencing to the 5 in the house and how you have the counterfeit spirit, you have the destiny, and then you also have the body, all working together against the power and against the soul. Okay, so now we understand what we're dealing with here. So what I want to reference to now is another text to kind of go more into these modes of action and how they use the body as instruments to carry out what they're interested in doing for themselves. So this is page 31 in a book called The Book of Truth, and this is the voice of Osiris here. So this is what it says here. It says, I would now take you to the astral regions of evil for a short time, that ye may also see what was being planned by who? By Satnaku. And in the Bibles, it uses the word Satan there. But it says here, Satnaku. It says, as regards repentance, it was not in his, meaning Satnaku's, mind. In fact, his will to do evil was even greater than ever. For this reason, he collected around him all his rebels, okay, all his rebels, and divided them up into groups. He divided them up into groups. Over each group, he placed a leader, and each leader of each group had his special instructions, insomuch as one group would be detailed to foster lust to kill and shed blood, another would foster sex passions, and so on. And if you're familiar with the first book of Enoch, it kind of goes into that, dealing with chapter 7, then dealing with chapter 8, how you had these particular ones that said they wanted to go into the children of men and carry out what they wanted to do. And then they also taught and did various different things. So that kind of goes along with this, of course, where it talks about how there were groups that were set up, and over each group there was a leader. And then each group basically led groups astray based on specific instructions that was given to them. So we have here, we're dealing with an emotional thing here, because it talks about the lust to kill and shed blood, and another would foster sex passions. Another would foster sex passions. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up the word emotion, let's precept that with another letter. So we're going to actually go into the Thessalonians, which is another epistle by Paul, and we're going to look at chapter 2, and we're going to look at line 7 just real quick. It says, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. Okay, so now we know what the lawlessness is. I think we're dealing with these sexual passions, of course, that lead to carnal procreation, which traps you inside of a tomb, which is the body. Okay, which is the body, which is one of the three things alongside counterfeit spirit and destiny that is actually working against what? The power and the soul, the rational part of the soul that is asleep in most people. Okay, and we see that the daemons enter into the two irrational parts of the soul. But here, this word restrains is dealing with emotion. It's dealing with emotion. It says, he who now restrains, and in my notes I has that as caught up in emotional coherence. Now that we're bringing that word emotional coherence out, let's go into what we're dealing with that definition. So in my notes here, I have emotional coherence occurs when changes in emotion components occur at the same time, For instance, coherence would occur if someone saw blood and showed a disgust expression. Remember, we brought out how one of the modes of action was to foster the lust to kill. Do you remember that? Okay, going back to this definition here, it says, for instance, coherence would occur if someone saw blood and showed a disgust expression, experienced an increase in arousal, remember sexual passions, and made an external cognitive appraisal all at the same time. So when that occurs, there's something that happens in your glands. Remember, it says in Ephesians, it says we're dealing with those who are in heavenly places. So we're dealing with the higher regions of yourself. And if we look at that as being somewhere where there's glands located, you know how you have like a hypothalamus gland, a pituitary gland, and a pineal gland. So here it appears what ends up happening when you have this trifecta going on, it appears that we're dealing with possibly you becoming a feeding source, because it looks like your glands produce a juice, which is like an auric, thick, sticky substance that develops when you are having this coherent emotional experience. And remember here in Thessalonians, it says only he will let, meaning he now restrains, will do so until he is out of the way. So basically, until you are basically completely empty. Now, for example, you have solar, there's ways that there's certain energies that are being made available to specific people based on how they're using their energies of life. So when you're able to receive these energies, of course, you're able to revitalize your bodies and so forth on the various different planes of existence. And there are those that exist who don't necessarily have the ability to make their glands produce certain types of substances. Okay, so what ends up happening when we go and precept that information, what Paul was talking about in Ephesians when he says you wrestle not with flesh and blood, but you're dealing with an extraterrestrial type of thing, because what they're causing is they're fostering certain types of emotions in the people, whether it be through movies, whether it be through voices, whether it just be through daily involvement with everyday situations that are set up to keep you in an emotional roller coaster. Because what it ends up doing is it produces this particular substance that allows you to be fed on. Okay, so you have that substance that's being used, and then you have that substance that comes out externally, of course, that is also part of the feeding for these low-grade ETs, extraterrestrials. Okay, so that's pretty much what we're dealing with. Is we're dealing with that in terms of what Paul was trying to explain to his brethren when he was trying to tell them that, look, you wrestle not with flesh and blood, but you're dealing with, you're dealing with, here it calls them powers, it calls them rulers of the darkness of this world, of this age, and against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. That means they're sitting in places that they decided to take for themselves. Remember, it reads that in earlier texts in the book of Psalms, where it talks about these particular beings, and then Revelations 18 kind of gives you an idea of what they possibly look like. I want to kind of introduce you to a clip here where it deals with these particular ones that were created, and they were created to obviously create problems in the world. And I'll introduce that clip to you real quick. But in that particular clip, it's kind of just dealing with these particular ones who are like thin, yellowed haired and everything. And even when you precept that with thin, yellowed furred, but when you precept that in the law, it talks about how if something dealing with genetics and reproduction, if something has thin yellow anything coming out, whether it be in the skin or in the scalp or anything like that, is pronounced unclean. So in these particular letters, it's talking about lawlessness. It's talking about lawlessness. So then it would only make sense that that particular ingredient would be in this particular son of perdition, or this one who sets himself up as God, and so forth, above all that which is God. It appears that we can look for those characteristic traits in those types of improper incarnations that are taking place and everything like that. So what I wanted to do in this particular video is just kind of give you some tools to look into, so you can go the rest of the way on trying to understand what it means when it says that you wrestle not with flesh and blood, but you're dealing with those who are sitting in high places and using some form of a power. Some people can look at that power as being telepathy. Some people can look at it as being, any of these clairvoyant, any of these types of things that someone's capable of doing. It could be coming through the television. It could be and taking hold of those digital images to communicate with you through. It could be, possibly, taking over a digital image on a magazine. It could be possibly using and inhabiting those that are around you, of course, to speak and to try to communicate with you, or to speak to you and so forth, to try to get you to produce these particular substances, because it appears that they need you to be in some form of torment. And remember, those were we went over that in terms of what was possibly used in our Psalms 83 series, when we were talking about these particular hated birds, hateful birds, detestable beasts, and unclean spirits are possibly doing to try to prevent you from becoming a nation. Because if you're not sending up, if you're not sending the knowledge up, if you're not sending the essence up, as a form of tithing, then you're possibly unable to have an appropriate structure with your various different vehicles and your various different bodies that you have access to, or that you could have access to, if someone was not trying to prevent you from being a nation. So if you have any questions or comments about this particular video, you can leave it underneath the like button in the comment area, and we can have a dialogue about it. But all of the actual resources that I went over in this particular video, I'll definitely leave it underneath the like button for you, and I'll see you in the next video.